there's this paradigm in the gaming disorder literature that says, people who use like the internet are no more addicted to the internet than alcoholics are to bottles, right? It's really about the content that they're engaging with. And I think what is important is to kind of figure out what that content is. And if it's a shared social experience, that sounds like a really good benefit. And in gaming, most of the thing that you're gambling with is your time, right? It's just all this time. And then when you add the money part with the loot boxes, my concern is people who are already vulnerable. And some of the treatments for addiction include things like abstinence. So I imagine like, what would it be like if people just kind of pulled the plug on gaming? And I think for a lot of people, it'd be just such a blow.
Welcome to Chaos in the Lobby. I'm Spoonie Bard, and with me today is Dr. Charlotte Beard, a psychologist known for her work on video games and its related addictions. Dr. Beard is an assistant professor of psychology who leads the Sing Laboratory at Palo Alto University, which stands for the Studies on Innovation, Neurodiversity, and Gaming. Her research covers both the problems and positive uses of gaming. So, Dr. Beard, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And for those who aren't familiar with your work, do you mind going a bit more into detail about it, what exactly it is that you're researching and how you've studied it?
Sure. So a lot of my work is on how self-esteem is related to gaming. So I can tell you a little bit about how I came to do this. I started my graduate studies in 2012, 2013, and right around that time, the new version of the DSM came out, and that's the big book that talks about the different mental disorders that people have. It's a diagnostic. And in that last section, which is conditions for further study, there was something called internet gaming disorder. And as someone who loves gaming and has a lot of involvement with the gamer community, I was kind of like, oh no, what's this, right? That was my initial reaction. Then I thought about it a little bit more and I said, oh, well, there's certainly people that I've known or friends of friends who kind of got lost in WoW in college and maybe had those poor outcomes and things like that. So, I thought as someone who loves this community and is a part of it, I'd love to be part of this research. And so as it was defined as a behavioral addiction, it still is. And some of the treatments for addiction include things like abstinence. So I imagine like, what would it be like if people just kind of pulled the plug on gaming? And I think for a lot of people, it'd be just such a blow. And I was thinking, well, maybe we could look at why that is and what that means for treatment that's informed within the gaming community. So my work was on something called gaming contingent self-worth. My question was, what happens when the best parts of your identity as you define them are wrapped up in the game? Like it could be your achievements, it could be the character you've built or the friendships you have. And so, is there something about our self-esteem and how it's related to gaming that could also lead to problematic gaming or different outcomes? And then maybe inform treatment about how to approach this when we're looking at people's identities more broadly. So that was the basis of my research. And I've worked now internationally with lots of great researchers in Australia and Korea and Great Britain, many of whom are quite farther than we are in the United States, but hopefully we're catching up a little bit more on things like differences in cultural presentations of internet gaming disorder and how this looks with different people in different areas and what's the same and what's different. And it's been really rewarding. And now in my lab, we're really looking at sort of the connection between neurodivergence and internet gaming disorder. And many of the people in my lab are interested in positive psychology and positive aspects of games. So that's the short version of what we do.
Yeah, something I appreciate about reading over some of your papers was that you do approach internet gaming addiction from a standpoint and a point of view that holds a little bit more respect for the benefits of gaming than maybe some of the other papers I've read on it. And there are, of course, a lot of benefits. Like for decades now, they've studied the critical thinking benefits, the hand-eye coordination benefits. But there's the new socialization and educational aspects of it. Like, for instance, when I was growing up, there wasn't really a game that everybody played. We had like GoldenEye and Age of Empires, but they were still niche. There wasn't like a Fortnite or a Roblox, which is so ubiquitous now. And addiction obviously is a concern with that, but we still see the trend of gaming playing a larger role in the lives of younger people. How would you say that this has been affecting the younger people and their education? Because from my perspective, it does appear to be kind of a double-edged sword with social media and gaming.
Hmm. Well, it's hard to say because it's so individualized for each person. I think there's really something about a shared platform where people go and you can say, oh, well, yeah, I know what that is. And we've done that. Just like when you talked about GoldenEye and I like suddenly flashed all these
Yeah.
amazing memories I had about it. So there's a lot of great pro-social stuff. And I'm thinking about this work by someone called Jane McGonigal. Maybe you've heard of her. She wrote a book called Reality is Broken and talks about all these amazing benefits to games, right? That help build resiliency and teamwork and things like that. So, there's a real great place for games in the lives of many people that I think could be beneficial. With respect to kids, it's a complicated question because I'll tell you what, one of the biggest referral questions that I get in my clinic is like, my kid is addicted to their iPad. And you go, okay, hold on, right? Like there's this paradigm in the gaming disorder literature that says, people who use like the internet are no more addicted to the internet than alcoholics are to bottles, right? It's really about the content that they're engaging with. And I think what is important is to kind of figure out what that content is. And if it's a shared social experience, that sounds like a really good benefit. And if it's something that is causing more problems or someone can't control or something like that, then it's something to look at a little more deeply.
And just to play devil's advocate, do you think that the overuse of, the gamification of education, like you said, kids being addicted to
Mm,
their iPad, could ultimately hurt people's ability to learn? Because, how we learn is also such an important skill to learn, uh,
mm,
and,
mm,
for effective critical thinking as well. But, if learning is always accompanied by that immediate gratification of a dopamine hit from a game,
mhm,
then suddenly having to learn without a game involved might
mm.
become kind of difficult for people.
Sure. I think there's a place for slow, deep learning. I crave, sitting in a library chair and just like reading books. It's like, it just doesn't feel like that's part of our society anymore. So yeah, I think that's something that's important. Whether or not it is like damaging to the learning process, I don't know if I know the data and research on that I could answer it with any satisfaction. But in general, I think a good balance is important.
One of your expertise is neurodivergencies like autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And all of these
Mhm.
unfortunately come with a fair degree of stigmatism. Thankfully, less now as we've gained more of an understanding about the spectrums that they exist on and what it really means to be neurodivergent. But how do you see gaming addiction intersecting with neurodivergencies?
Oh, I love this question because there is a good amount of evidence about the relationship between ADHD and problematic gaming. So around this idea that ADHD brain is sort of seeking dopamine, and gaming it gives you all of that. I mean, it has an amazing capacity to present different reinforcement schedules. So you're finding a random treasure box and then you're collecting points and all these different things. And for the ADHD brain that's sort of deprived of that opportunity, the gaming environment is just like, it's a cold glass of water. It feels really a lot of my patients describe it as like just absolutely relaxing and like I can finally take a deep breath, right? Because their brains have been craving that all day. And so I see that as a vulnerability for people in order with respect to getting hooked on gaming. And it's something that, and as a treating provider, I definitely want to always screen for to say, okay, what's going on with neurodivergence with respect to ADHD. And then there's sort of different ways to work around that, right? To make your present environment more rewarding, to talk about different treatments for ADHD in order to get the relief in a different way as well. And then with respect to sort of more neurodivergent communities, and this is more anecdotal, what I've seen talking with treating providers and with my own work, there are some really amazing spaces online for people who are neurodivergent. Like they feel like people with autism, for example, might feel really comfortable in communities and groups of people who are gamers. It's like a low stakes social situation. They're not sort of feeling like they have to mask and make eye contact and all this other stuff. And so it again can be a really great place to practice and facilitate social communication when otherwise it's sort of like a grind day to day.
I agree. I think it's interesting how the social aspect of gaming has changed over the years because I had an experience that I think a lot of people shared growing up where, I would be, my parents didn't always approve of the amount of time I was spending gaming on the family computer. And they would, say things like, oh, you should be with your friends. You should go outside and play. And I would often respond with, well, I'm playing with my friends right now, with games like StarCraft and BattleNet. And for those who might be too young to remember, BattleNet was kind of the first multiplayer networking platform that gained like mainstream notoriety. And it was the first time you could just hop on and jump in and out of games with people that were not just down the street or at a LAN party. And I still love a good LAN party,
Mhm.
but you could play with people on the other side of the world. So there was this addition of socialization that was added to gaming. And like you mentioned, for people who maybe don't have that, who have been ostracized at school for one reason or another, or just aren't great at making friends. I do think that, especially now with Roblox and Fortnite, kids are more able to socialize than ever before,
Mm.
and that can be a benefit of gaming, but it can also kind of hurt because if people get too entrenched in this, maybe they lose some in-person social skills. Is that something that
Uh,
you've looked into?
Yeah, they've looked at this like in early days too of computer mediated communication was like the buzzword back when they first started looking at this. And there's this idea about the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So if you have like really great social connections in real life, and then you're sort of meeting these social connections online, or you have like other people, it's just like enriching. It's just adding more. But if you are, let's say, socially anxious, you might create some like weak connections, but it's also really good to get that experience in real life as well. So it's about kind of optimizing both in real life and gaming, and I think it can be very rich. But I hear what you're saying. I think there is something about sort of marginalized communities as well. So like right now, I'm in quite a rural area. I can't imagine like if there was someone here who maybe like didn't have a lot of friends who shared some of their social identities, like maybe they're queer and maybe they're neurodivergent and they want to connect with people who are, but there's only like 20 people at their school and they don't see themselves in those people. I think it would be cool. They can like find those communities. But especially when we talk about kids, though, there is this sort of other layer of like, safety and parental, oversight. And, one of the things I always talk to parents about is like, if you're worried, just join them. Just get the headset. Just make the Roblox account. Just get on there, and then you really get a sense of what's going on.
I think that's great advice. Some of my fondest memories are playing video games with my dad, and we would go over to my friend's house, and one of my friends had a dad who was really into StarCraft,
Yeah.
and so every time we were over there, it was like the three of us trying to finally
Mm.
beat him in StarCraft. He was much better than us, but yeah, and I think that connecting with parents on that way is a good way for parents to kind of make the transition from not just being a parental figure, but also kind of being a friend to their
Mm.
kids and more involved in their kids' interests. Whereas I think in the especially 90s and early 2000s, there was always this, at least from my perspective with me and my friends group, there was a big push of you guys should be spending less time playing video games. It should be an hour a day and move on. But we see a
Ah,
lot of
yeah.
people spend way more than an hour per day.
Well, there's a big difference, and you've nailed it, between engagement and addiction, and using number of hours someone's playing as a proxy for how addicted they are. It's just like, that's not quite it. I mean, of course, they're correlated, right? If you're addicted, you're going to play much more. But, there's much more to like kind of the underlying psychological components of addiction that, really, really talk about problematic use versus just high engagement.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask was where do you personally draw the line? I know everybody's different. There's a lot of nuance to addiction, and the reason people get addicted also plays a huge part in this. But where would the line be between somebody who's just enjoying a hobby and somebody who's maybe addicted? Could somebody who's playing 20, 40 plus hours per week, is that
Mm.
necessarily addiction? Because there are plenty of people who I might personally argue are able to play 40 plus hours a week and you know, it's not affecting their life, their work, their social, you know.
Yeah. I think, where do I draw the line? Well, there is sort of a thing that a lot of psychologists talk about, like called functional impairment. And it's this idea that it's affected some area of your life, your work, social. fill in the blank, right? School for kids. And so that's like kind of a telltale sign, right? Are you using gaming just over everything and you feel just this compulsive need, and that's why you're doing it? And then in social psychology, they have this idea of sort of a harmonious motivation versus a compulsive sort of motivation. It's like, so why are you using it? Is it something that brings you joy? Is it something that kind of meets those psychological needs in a positive way versus, it's kind of filling a gap? I think, one thing that is an easy way for a lot of people to think about this, who they maybe haven't before, is like, think about people who watch like a ton of TV, and sometimes it's celebrated, right? Like, yeah. Oh, I watched all of this Netflix series this weekend, and be like, oh, that must have been so nice. But when you're like, I gamed for 8 hours, and be like, whoa, I don't know. And so I think, occasional use like that can also be okay. But, and maybe we'll talk about the criteria. How do we find what an addictive gamer kind of is based on these two different paradigms in the US versus kind of the world at large. But yeah, there's some pretty concrete tells and markers for addictive gaming versus just high engagement gaming.
Yeah, I would be really interested to hear about those because I sometimes think that, gaming has kind of become a third place. There's traditionally was work, and then, home, and then the bar or the park or the cafe or wherever that third place that you would socialize is. And with gaming becoming more and more social, I do see, at least from my perspective, gaming becoming that third place where you meet up with friends after work and kind of hang out. So if you were spending 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week in the cafe, hanging out with your friends, chatting, nobody would call that an addiction. But
cafe addiction. I think
you have that cafe addiction. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But with gaming, it doesn't really factor the same way. People see it as more problematic, I think, overall.
That's the judgment part that I was initially kind of worried about. Like, oh gosh, because I think so many times I've heard parents go, oh, well, you're just sitting there doing the game by yourself. And you're like, oh, no, it's like a rich social experience. So yeah, let's talk about it. So there's two paradigms, right? Or there's two ways that they've looked at addiction. The first one was in that 2013 revision of the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's published by the American Psychiatric Association. It's what defines what depression is, what anxiety is, and everything like that. So they have this section, it's called Section 3, and it has all these conditions for further study. So it says, okay, there may be some problems here. We want to get some more information. So we're going to lay out several criteria about what we think this is, and then do research and see if we can substantiate it. To this day, and it's still a condition for further study in the United States. And I'm going to tell you what those criteria are for it, but I'll also tell you about the other paradigm. So the other one is from the World Health Organization. They published a manual called the International Classification of Diseases. And this is a reference that's used internationally that has, again, a lot of different diagnoses, and these could be medical diagnoses, asthma, and then also they have something called gaming disorder. So not internet gaming disorder, but gaming disorder. So it's a little bit more broad. I'll tell you the international classifications of diseases one first because it's shorter. Basically, they said you only have to have these three things going on for a year to say that you have gaming disorder, but you have to have all three. And those are this: one is impaired control. The second one is sort of this increased priority over all other activities to the point where you're not doing those other things. And the third one is you continue despite having negative consequences. And how I see this, I think in like sort of real world terms, is when people come to me and go, I want to stop gaming, but I can't. Everything else is coming second and it's ruining my life. I'm like, boom, 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 right? Those three are met. Now, the US one, internet gaming disorder and the DSM, their proposed criteria there's 9 of them. And it's called a polyphyletic criteria. So it means you only have to have 5 of any of these 9. And those are preoccupation with gaming, withdrawal symptoms, which looks interesting in gaming. It can look like you're irritable, you're on edge, those sorts of things. Tolerance, you need to use more over time. And then unsuccessful attempts to cut back, loss of interest in previous hobbies, you continue use despite the negative consequences. And then an interesting one is deception. Deception of family members and other important people about gaming. And I see this a lot when it comes to like loot boxes and those sorts of things. So talking about that too. And then the use of games to relieve a negative mood, it's called mood modification. And then finally, jeopardizing jobs, education, and things like that. So those are the 9. And I know that's a lot, but these are all the kind of symptoms of internet gaming disorder as this condition for further study.
That's really interesting. I'm listening to those and I'm like, oh, how many of those do I tick?
It's a reflection exercise. Yeah, I get it. Mm-hmm.
But it does make me think about, like you said, it's difficult for people to pull back. And are they thinking that it's ruining their life? And I remember reading about Irving Goffman and the Looking Glass Self and how we have these different versions of ourself that we present. There's a different version of yourself at home, around your family, around your friends, a different version of yourself at school or at work, and how we kind of mentally choose which one of these selves that we identify, like which one of these is a mask and which one of these is actually us. And I think that video games also adds a layer into that in who you are when you're playing this game. And it makes me think of this episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, if you're familiar. The gang that I think it's called the gang gets addicted or something, and they're addicted to playing this video game. And one of them, Charlie, says, I want to stop playing, but I can't. It's like when I'm doing well in the game, I'm doing well in real life. And one of the other people says, I want to make fun of you so bad, but I know what you mean. And so sometimes that episode did make me think about people who get addicted and how that's probably part of it. They're getting perhaps that success in the video game, and it's just quicker. It's much quicker to establish yourself in a video game than it is to establish a successful career or a family or a healthy home life. But yeah, it is interesting that, like you mentioned, loot boxes. And today there's different ways that you can get addicted to gaming. It's not just playing the game. And for those who have never bought a loot box or don't know what they are, they're digital crates that you can pay usually a nominal amount of money for, $1 or $2, and you open them and you'll get like a skin for your character or a different item that can often be resold on a marketplace for sometimes thousands of dollars. So they're kind of virtual slot machines.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's obviously a lottery of sorts, and that's no different than gambling. And I personally don't approve of that being added to games. I have no problem with microtransactions or skins, but I do think that you should know what you're getting when you purchase something. So what role do you see those loot boxes as having in a gaming addiction in your research?
I'm highly concerned about them. I mean, it's these criteria that I told you, the big long list from the U.S. site, Internet Gaming Disorder. Those criteria are actually drawn from the criteria of gambling disorder. So it's the same sort of like neurobiological thing that's going on when it comes to gaming and gambling as a behavioral addiction. And so there's a vulnerability. And in gaming, most of the thing that you're gambling with is your time, right? It's just all this time. And then when you add the money part with the loot boxes, my concern is people who are already vulnerable to this addictive paradigm and the game now have extra vulnerability. So yeah, I think it draws on that again, that reinforcement that people like say with ADHD and other conditions might get hooked on in a way that seems unfair to me. So I think transparency is good. I agree with you. I think, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And, people do like the ability to buy something and sell it more for later. And that's fun. So, I mean, I do agree with limited offerings, limited time skins that could be resold. I mean, I think there's ways that people could still engage with that marketplace community without it having be actual like gambling.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate part is that this isn't limited. Children are exposed to that, and children are getting accustomed to that idea of, getting a dopamine hit from winning that rare skin or pulling that lever and clicking that button one more time to open the next loot box. And I think that's a really dangerous thing.
Well, let me tell you, can I tell you about this lifespan perspective? This is something that I think is so interesting. I think when people come to me about gaming addiction, and it's a kid, it's like a completely different treatment and a completely different conversation than if I'm working, like, say, with an adult. Because a lot of times what's happening with the kids is it comes out as a behavioral problem, right? It's not so much they're addicted to the game as much as it's like the parent-child relationship is really getting a hit, because every time I take their iPad away, they're having this huge tantrum, and I don't know what to do. And so we've tried to lock it up and we've tried to do this. So and to me, it's just like a kid in a candy store, a classic example. If you let them like go down the aisle and like with their arm like this and like put everything in the cart, I mean, boy, you're going to have a tough time every time you go to the grocery store, right? And so same thing with boundary setting and, improving the relationship, and for older kids, maybe compromising and giving them a seat at the table with gaming, understanding what it is. But the conflict that can occur there with kids and parents is like, can I get your credit card? Right. And then what do? Like, they need to be too young to understand what money is and how you get it and things like that. So it does add a layer of complexity that makes it hard for both adults and kids.
That's fascinating, especially like you mentioned the credit card. And I think that's interesting because kids already have a difficult time grasping the concept of money, but even adults have a difficult time grasping the concept of money when it's a credit card. So adding into that, a kid using a credit card, it just seems like numbers on a screen, or just hitting okay and getting the thing that you wanted that made you excited, like you said, in a candy store. And some people might make
like, you don't see the bottom of it, right? Like back in the day when you pull that stuff out of your wallet, it was like, okay, that's how much there is, but it's like this abstract, unquantifiable thing.
Yeah, exactly. It is spent in the abstract, and that's tough. And how do you bounce back from that and you start almost having to have more mature conversations with a toddler that's used to using your credit card than you would normally have to. Normally, they wouldn't have to start grasping the concept of money until a little bit older.
Oh, but they won't, and that's the frustration for parents, because why don't they get it? It's like, because they're developmentally, they can't. So you just have to like tell them you get $5.
Yeah,
and don't tell them why. You know what I mean? Don't even bother with that. If that's what you want to do, then do that. But like, you have to kind of be inflexible. To keep it as like concrete as possible.
Yeah. And it isn't black and white though. Some people might make the argument that, you can't talk about gaming addiction the same way you can talk about drug addiction, because there isn't that physical addiction part like there would be to some drugs. I mean, I might say that there is, because of dopamine, and that can be physically addictive to some people. But as far as treatment goes, you can't exactly, put someone in a detox for gaming or put them in a rehabilitation center for gaming. So what does treatment look like for someone who is addicted?
Here's the interesting part: you can, right? And in certain countries they have, and there's this place in Washington called Restart. Not sure if you've heard of it, but they're like kind of one of the major clinics who treat people with problematic and addictive gaming, and they have like a retreat where people go, and it's just a total digital detox, no devices, nothing. And you just kind of reset. And I think that's very interesting, but obviously you have to have the buy-in of the person who's like consenting to do it. From my approach, like, a lot of people I see, they say gaming's been a part of my life for a long time, and I don't want to say goodbye completely. And it feels like if I admit it's addictive, or if I get this treatment, I'm like sacrificing this really important thing to me. And like, well, it definitely doesn't have to be like that forever, but I see why it feels like that right now. And it helps people build their readiness to change. And so change it doesn't always have to look the same for everybody, where you never play a game again. Some people might decide that's right for them, but other people might say, hey, if I can sort of build up my in real life friendships and resources and sense of self-worth and all this kind of stuff, then my gaming will be less problematic.
Interesting. And what is the recovery like after they've left those retreats? Do you see a recidivism rate similar to that of drug use, or?
Oh, that's an interesting. I don't know. I think you maybe talk to Restart and ask them that, because that'd be a really interesting question
Yeah.
to get answered. Yeah.
I guess that would make sense that people could go to like a a detox of from digital. That actually sounds nice,
I was
even
thinking
if
that.
it's not for addiction, just to be able to not look at a screen for a week.
Can you imagine? I don't even know when the last time that was for me.
I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like I could challenge myself to do it at home myself, but I feel like I would fail.
Yeah. I hear it.
We did get into a little bit about education, but I do want to touch back on that because there are games and how they unintentionally teach people skills and life skills. And we mentioned before we started the interview about Kerbal Space Program, which if people aren't familiar, it's a game where you launch rockets of little green men into orbit and you try and get them to different planets and moons and do science experiments, things like that. But it has had the unintentional effect of teaching loads of people about orbital mechanics that they otherwise wouldn't have learned, and they didn't sit down with the intention of like, oh, I'm going to learn how to about a Hoffman orbit transfer. I'm going to learn how to calculate delta V. It's just it's a necessary part of play, and so they learned it unintentionally. And do you see this as something that schools might leverage more in the future, as because you can make a game, right, that teaches about math and it's a math game and kids learn more about algebra while playing it, but it's very clear that it's a math game. We had those in the computer lab when I was in elementary school. But
Mhm.
these games that kind of teach people without them realizing they're being taught, I think could be leveraged to help people learn. Is that something you see maybe happening? Or I know this
That's
is kind of an
interesting.
opinion.
No, it is interesting because it's not it's a little sneaky. It's like
Yeah.
we're just gonna play a game, but you're doing it. I think there's something about telling people about education and then, letting them know like what the intention is. And I think that that makes sense, at least when you're at school. But I don't know, this unintentional learning happens in such interesting ways. Like one of the reasons I love the gaming community is I meet so many people with really interesting advanced vocabularies. And it's like, oh, well, that's what's going on in the gaming environment when you're like traveling to, medieval times and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it does happen in a passive way. So thinking about passive learning, like I was playing this game Idle Space Miner. I don't know if you've ever played it, but I was like, wow, I have to keep thinking about these multipliers and all this kind of stuff. Like you're right, it just happens automatically. I think it'd be great if it could be embedded in more things. But to be honest, I don't know what education looks like from this point forward with things like AI and all these other things coming to the forefront. There's so many opportunities for education, and making education fun and rewarding. Why not? Right.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the vocabulary because it's something that I have noticed within myself as well, that I will use words that I definitely learned in video games. And I think the first one of these that I vividly remember was the word concur, which means agree. And there
Yeah.
was the Corsair in StarCraft, the little characters, when you tell him, give him an order, he says, I concur. And at first I didn't know what that meant. But you kind of glean it from context over time. And so, yeah, I agree. I do think that it has expanded my vocabulary and that of, my social groups. But with I think
Um,
that's interesting too, because people have started to say, "Oh, I asked ChatGPT instead of I Googled it," and
yeah.
I personally think that that's a slippery slope where people, because at least when you're Googling something, you still have to kind of sift through the information and make an informed decision about what might be factual, what might be misinformation. Whereas when people are using ChatGPT, if it gives them inaccurate information, which happens, I've used ChatGPT and it's given me something that's just blatantly false. But
Mm,
people are putting a lot of stock into what it's saying, and I think that can be dangerous too, especially with like addiction and degrading people's
mm.
ability to think critically, or teaching people how to learn, especially because kids now in school are using it to write papers. I don't know how true this is, but every now and then, on Reddit or something, someone will post about, oh, I'm a teacher, and all of these papers were chat
Uh-huh.
GPT.
I
Uh,
mean, yeah, as a professor, it's something I think about a lot. Um,
yeah,
you
that
know,
was my question. Is this
it's
something you're
not it's
seeing?
not going away, right? It's going to be there, and so I'm like, okay, and then it will be there in people's lives, right? So I'm sort of, and I think people differ. with respect to especially professors of how much they want to use or allow the use of ChatGPT, and I understand that. So what I do is I talk to people about how to use it, mindfully and with a critical eye, and ask for resources, and go check them yourself, or put it in a learning mode or something like that with these different prompts. And then, okay, now export your ChatGPT discussion and submit it with your assignment. So I can see sort of what was it that was aided by AI, which could be very functional and adaptive and make it a richer sort of paper. And then what was your own work? And I think that might be a way to help. But yeah, I mean, what an interesting time of life we're in right now, trying to figure out how that's going to affect everything.
It is. Yeah. And that's interesting that I haven't spoken to a lot of professors or teachers that that allow AI, or how they've managed to combat it, because that's a tough thing, because you can't always necessarily, sometimes there's dead giveaways, but you can't always necessarily tell what is and isn't AI, and how does that, play into plagiarism. And because is it plagiarism? At the university level, is it considered, if I turned in a paper, AI wasn't obviously a thing when I was at university, but is it considered plagiarism today?
There are AI policies that a lot of universities are creating. And the interesting thing is academic journals also have AI policies now. Like, how much can you use AI and to what extent, and how do you disclose it? You can't add AI as an author. I think that's like a pretty universal thing, but just the transparency and disclosure, I think, is where everyone's at right now. But there's like some excitement about opportunities that AI can afford. And then obviously some concerns.
Yeah. I think AI got dumped on us as a society a little too soon. I don't think we've necessarily found exactly where it fits into society yet, but I think it's everywhere as we find that, especially in gaming. The gaming community has pushed back against AI very hard.
Tell me more. I'm curious.
So obviously with game design, AI could play a role in designing sprites, designing graphics, writing code. And all of this obviously takes jobs away from developers, which people don't like. But at the same time, people have found that it's also just a lower quality of work right now than you would necessarily see from a human. And so gaming, and I have found this on YouTube as well, is if people suspect something is AI, there's quite a large pushback. And there was a time when I didn't used to show my face. It was just voiceover content, mostly out of laziness, because it was, once you add that camera and face, it's a lot more work. But a lot of people would accuse me of being AI, which I thought was interesting. And for the record, I am not AI, but people did. I've even had a couple people accuse me of being AI, even with the camera, which I think is interesting.
And I'm like trying to figure out if you are.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I could see that. You don't want to like, if the game's like vibe coded, I could see how that feels real different for gamers. Yeah, because there's something about the lore of where the game comes from.
Yeah, and I really like the stories behind games were made. And if it's just some guy who's like, yeah, I asked ChatGPT to create an RPG, well, that's not very interesting. But there is a debate going on right now, because between Epic Games and Steam, and where one is removing the disclosure requirements of developers to say this game was made with AI, or partially with AI, or AI was involved, whereas Steam won't remove that yet. And I'm hoping that they don't, because like you said, there is a requirement for academic papers, and there's a court requirement at the university level that they disclose it. And I would like to see that stay with gaming as well.
Agreed. Yeah. The one more thing about like gaming addiction and problematic gaming and AI is sort of this, the sycophantic responding, where AI models be like, oh my gosh, wow, what a great idea. And you're absolutely right. And gosh, how brilliant, right? It's just, completely validating for the user. I think that's one thing that can be really attractive for people. That's something I worry about when people are trying to figure out if they're highly engaged or if they're addicted, and they're sort of trying to ask ChatGPT for that information. That
is interesting.
Yeah, that's my disclaimer, is like, talk to a therapist, talk to a psychologist. They will give you a straight answer in a little bit of a different way. an AI
That is
bot.
interesting, like a constant positive feedback loop, no matter what you say. Yeah. And how that could become dangerous as because people's social interactions could be degraded as they get used to just constant positivity. And if they are constantly using AI, they might think that that's how human interaction is supposed to be. And once it's not positive, they might interpret neutral interactions maybe as negative. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And that's a great point because I know there are times when I'm with my patients and I'm like, I think you and I right now disagree. And I have to wait until we have that rapport where I can do that to make sure that they're like, they know that we can disagree and still like you work together.
Yeah.
And if they don't have opportunities to disagree, that might be something that would be harder.
And I think social media has also kind of damaged people's ability to disagree in a constructive
Mm-hmm.
way, because people have gotten very used to the anonymity of the internet and being able to just be like, "Oh, that's stupid, you're dumb," like, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of idea where instead of just being like, "Hey, here's some information," or "Here's my opinion," or framing it from the perspective of this is an opinion and this is mine and I respect yours. But I think we've lost some of that, unfortunately, due to social media. But I do wonder how, as a mental health professional, you've seen ChatGPT play into your patients, because I know that some people, not just ChatGPT, I'm using that unfortunately as a catch-all for AI, but people have been using AI as a replacement for therapy,
Oh yeah.
which
Mm-hmm.
not a
It's
great
a
idea.
major use case, right? And what people are using AI for. And, what's one of the biggest reasons I find is, the mental health system there's people don't have enough access to it. There's all this stuff with insurance companies and reimbursement and, access to clinicians. And that's really difficult. And I think that's one of the root causes that we need to go for, because many people I imagine would want to see a therapist if they had better access to them. But yeah, there's quite a bit of talk going on about people using AI agents as therapists. And sometimes they say brilliant things, and then sometimes you're like, whoa, that's really concerning. And that you can't have that level of unpredictability in things that are, related to mental health care specifically. So, yeah, it's difficult. And I know people are creating apps that with, chief clinical officers or people who are, know what they're doing to try to meet people where they're at with respect to an AI agent and helping. And there's some use cases that can be really, really helpful, right? Super behavioral treatments where you just sort of need the recipe about like how to deal with a tantrum or something like that. In that case, it might be more helpful. Still not as good as a therapist, but maybe it could be possible. But in other things where, there's very serious things going on, like no replacement for a mental health provider.
Yeah, because I don't know that an AI is going to be effective at maybe picking up on the nuances of like mandatory reporting
Yeah.
or SI tendencies or ideations that, might not necessarily be as overt as they would be,
Mm-hmm.
in person or talking to somebody. I don't think an AI can pick that up off chatting with you the same way a human could, which is important. Yeah, obviously.
And your therapist has a memory, which is another thing to remember, right? Like, and can say, oh, well, there was this piece and this piece and this piece. I'm putting it together, and here's what I think. Yeah.
Well, my final question is for
Oh,
anybody who thinks that they might be addicted to gaming, or somebody who might just be wondering if they tick those boxes, or maybe they tick 4 out of 5 and they're concerned. What advice would you give for somebody who maybe wants to scale back or find mental health or find something to help them with their addiction?
I think I would first reflect that if they're doing that level of self-reflection, then that's a good thing. And I know there's a lot of talk in people's different cultural experiences about going to therapy and what it means. And I want people to know that seeking treatment, it may not look like what you think. It could be like a really cool collaboration between you and your therapist, someone who totally gets gaming and can just sort of help you work through what's going on for you. And it doesn't mean everything's at stake. So, I would say give it a try. think about it as low stakes, and that
Yeah.
could be a good way to go. And then, of course, if you're having like a crisis or something where it's really affecting your life, get treatment more sooner. With respect to resources, there is this community called Online Gamers Anonymous. They have resources for individuals who are experiencing problematic gaming or addictive gaming, and also family members of people who are experiencing that, which I think is really cool. And then they have a provider directory of people who say that they treat internet gaming disorder or gaming in the local communities. I haven't added yet, though, one caveat that I think is really important to add, which is though I keep talking about internet gaming disorder as a condition for further study, I do have to say, like, it is officially not a mental health diagnosis in the US. So you might not find that if you're sort of typing it in or trying to find a therapist. So you maybe just look for people who talk about technology and gaming in their Psychology Today profiles or something like that, and then ask them, this is what I'm experiencing. Is this something that you can treat? And a lot of therapists and psychologists will give you a 10-minute consultation, and you can get the scoop and kind of feel it out and see if they might be a good match for you.
That's all. And I'll put some links to some resources down in the description below. And again, I don't think, like you mentioned, you don't have to be going through something to seek out therapy. I think therapy is great for everybody who maybe just needs a sounding board or an impartial observer to talk things through, that they know they're not going to be judged, and they know that this information isn't going to get back to the other people in their lives by somebody who maybe wasn't as trustworthy as they thought, and they gossip it to people. And I think that's a great thing for
Mhm.
people to seek out, to kind of get ahead of things before they become a problem. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well said. Agreed. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it. It's been really fun to chat.
Likewise. My pleasure.